welcome to another episode of the Fast Break Preview Show. This is Aman Kidwai, joined by Patrick Martin and Dan Madigan. The Yukon Huskies took care of Michigan State in a wild one in their Sweet 16 matchup in Washington, D.C., jumping out to a huge lead very early in the game before letting it slide across the end of the first half and into the second. Michigan State actually reclaims the lead, but Alex Karaban and Terrace Reed once again come through in the clutch. 20 points from Reed, 17 points from Karaban. Terrace Reed hits 4 free throws to ice this thing at the end. Karaban also hits 2 and a big 3, of course. How are we feeling after the Michigan State game, the run, their run, and then they held on?
I don't know if you could dream up a better start than that 25-6 lead that UConn built up with about 10 minutes left in the first half. It just seemed like everything was working, everything was clicking, firing on all cylinders, and it was the total opposite for the Spartans, right? I think they were 0 for 12 or 0 for 10 during that run. You know, a team of this caliber at this time of the season is going to punch back at some point, and I figured that Michigan State would do that, and it wasn't really one big punch, I don't think. It was a lot of body blows towards the end of that first half where UConn kind of limped into the locker room, and then Michigan State kind of came out swinging in the second half and did reclaim the lead briefly. But, you know, the beauty of having a 19-point lead is that you can blow it, and it's still a tied game. And I think Michigan State was exhausted from coming back. They were incredibly physical, but UConn matched their physicality more often than not. I thought Michigan State was really incredible on the boards, and I thought UConn, you know, even though they did get out rebounded, they did kind of maybe not post their best rebounding performance but statistically on the season. I thought the way that they competed for loose balls really kept them in it, and it was a real team effort. Like, Solo Ball was hitting the boards, Braylon Mullen was hitting the boards, Karaban, Reed doing their thing. Like, the fact that it was a real team effort really kind of negated that advantage that Michigan State had, and at the end of the day, UConn just hit more shots and hit smarter shots. It obviously wasn't great to see Michigan State kind of reclaim that lead late and hang around with a few minutes left, but Michigan State was relying on a lot of those long mid-range twos from the likes of Fears and Cohen Carr, and they did hit a few of those late, but I'm going to take those chances if I'm UConn, and I know Dan Hurley is too. So my eyes kind of lit up when I saw that they were trying to get those like free throw line, like extended mid-range buckets. Even though they were hitting a little bit, you just have to play the odds. And I just felt like UConn was taking smarter shots and making them count. And even though rebounding was at a premium sometimes, UConn's shot quality kind of reigned supreme. And just another really impressive performance from both Reed and Karaban. It's just, Karaban looks like, and there's still a long way to go for this to really happen, but Karaban looks like Shabazz in 2014, Kemba in 2011. Just a guy that doesn't want to lose. You can tell, like he's said it in the locker room. He doesn't want to leave shots out on the floor. He's taking shots that he thinks he can make and can help the team. And that kind of fire is something that I think this team really needed. And is he going to be able to lead UConn to the Final Four, lead UConn to the championship? I'm not sure. We'll find out. That's why they play the games. But he has that kind of fire in his eye that, you know, this is one of the greatest winners in a winning program's history. He's 16-1 in the NCAA tournament. An insane number, third all time. Like, it kind of starts to speak for itself, and you can tell that he's not done putting on that UConn jersey yet. So just really impressed. I thought it was a total team effort. Obviously, you don't want to see a 19-point lead evaporate, but UConn hung in there. It took Michigan State's best punch and battled for 40 minutes, and now they get to face off with Duke on Sunday for a spot in the Final Four.
We talked about in the pregame show, where was the poop? That was my big thing, which, by the way, my wife hates that expression, so that one really fell flat. But hey, we move. But truly, there was no poop. I love the matchup, and for those first 15 minutes of the first half, UConn played perfect basketball. It was essentially like a perfect game that they were pitching. Obviously, then all you had to do from there on was hold off a Sparty team that was playing for their lives and playing for their for their season. It wasn't dissimilar, I think, to like the BYU game where they looked so good for so long, and then BYU shook off the rust and stormed back, and UConn had the horses to hold it off. And I just think it's so important. An old Marvin Lewis quote, I think, obviously been paraphrased over and over. The other team is trying to win too. So I'm really not sweating the 19-point lead being blown, especially with how early it happened. Like we have seen UConn can just score in bunches like this, and it's an avalanche. And it was the earliest kill shot that they have had all season, mind you, with actually most of their reserves, their bench in. And so like knowing that, like, one, the other team is trying to win, two, it's a very good Sparty team. I will officially put my hand up and say mea culpa for saying they stink, as I said in the preseason. Not my finest moment. They're very good. I mean, are they his best team? No, but they're a very good, solid Sweet 16 team. And then for like the third reason why nobody should sweat like blowing the lead or anything remotely of that nature is that like that is UConn's style. Like they play at such, or they want to play at such a slow, methodical, deliberate pace. It is hard to be that deliberate and perfect for 40 minutes. Like lulls happen. Like you saw the second Michigan State's like 6-minute scoring drought ended. UConn went on one of its own, and it's when that happens, it's best to kind of just like trade blows. And I'm not sure if anyone has played like Super Smash Brothers at all. I'm sure there's nods across the board there.
Very familiar.
But like the star that like the bouncing Mario star that you get, and then you're like perfect for a while. Essentially, all like when you play that UConn style of the slow, deliberate with the free flowing offense and that type of motion, you just gotta wait for a star. Wait for that star where you're playing champagne basketball for 5-10 minutes, build that run, rattle off an Evan Maya kill shot, and then essentially close out the game from there. That is the formula I think this team has ultimately settled on, and it's something I think that they haven't really figured out for a while. There was so much narrative throughout the season of like, what is this UConn team? I think that's it. They're a super, super tough team that in a 40-minute stretch will probably rattle off like a 10-0 run or so in a 5-minute span or something like that. And once that hits, they're tough enough to grind it out. So, I mean, yeah, that was outstanding. It just so happened that star was the start of the game, and which is bizarre because really UConn has not started well at all. Think back to the Big East final. But they, the other thing that we were looking at was, they won the first game because of Terrace. They won the second game mostly because of Alex. And we were saying, who's it going to come from next? And it was 100% a team effort. You think back to, Malachi Smith, 7 assists, 1 turnover, 4 steals. Jalen Stewart, first live action since February 3rd, comes in cans a 3. Jaden Ross, just doing stuff out there constantly, just always doing stuff. But it mostly, to have it be Reed as the savior game 1, Alex is against UCLA, and then have both of them step up is such a scary proposition when you consider the fact that, like, the Ice Cube kids, Braylon Mullins and Solo Ball, who are shooting like below 23% in their last 6 games, they went a combined 4 for 10. Braylon Mullins looks to be officially back. Solo had a bounce in his step once he finally saw a shot go down. That's life. Like, just keep shooting, getting through it. But that has the Huskies, I feel like, approaching unfathomable levels of back. If Reed, Alex are playing at that level, Silas Demery Jr. is getting healthy and settling into his kind of like defense first, distributor second role, and then Ball and Mullins at least hitting 35% of their shots or whatever. That's tough to beat, and that's the Death Star that we talked about in the non-conference, and it's peaking at the right time, which is even more exciting considering that, like, you can make the argument that Duke is not necessarily peaking at the right time.
I was also about to say something about just the fact that so many different things are peaking, including their best players, Alex Caravan and Terrace Reed. Malachi Smith, like you mentioned, after a really streaky run through the season. Jaden Ross even, he had hit a little bit of an injury as well in the middle of the season. All of those contributions are coming in so significant there. We talked about Ryba in the UCLA game. He didn't have his best game against Michigan State, but obviously still all of it matters. I want to focus on Silas Demery Jr. a little bit. He is said to be at 70%, not practicing live with the team since the Big East Championship. Really giving significant minutes there. If you think about why UConn won that Michigan State game, keeping fears in check to the extent that they did, forcing 4 turnovers on him, keeping him from being super explosive from a scoring perspective. That's Demery, and it's Malachi as well, and Jaden Ross, and those are just they don't always pop off on the stat sheet, but they're just such huge performances. And Malachi has 4 turnovers across 3 NCAA tournament games total. So it just sometimes it feels like it's like writing fan fiction, talking about what's going on right now. It's felt that way a little bit, obviously a lot in 2024, but it feels that way again when you just think about Reed monster performance, Caravan monster performance, Reed plus Caravan monster performance for this Michigan State win. On the note of kind of being up and not stepping on the throat, the thing we have seen from UConn teams in the past. That's where you just have to give a lot of respect to Michigan State for the way that they competed. That said, I think there are some things UConn could clean up there. The turnovers, there were only 10, but 10 is low for UConn. And I think when you look at some of those, again, it's just like really silly plays. It's not like I want unforced errors. Again, that's where we get into Cope type feelings, but Cope sounding type statements. But that was my observation from the turnovers there. And then Michigan State won the rebounding battle, something we were obviously aware of and highlighting. They're one of the best rebounding teams in the country. They were dominating the glass from the start. And so that hot start really prevented rebounding from being an issue early, such that UConn might be down 7 or 8, like the way they were across the balance of the game. Just huge all around. And for Solo Ball to have his return to glory as well, I think really significant there. So just so many tremendous things happening across those perimeter guys there.
Yeah, Solo Ball's kind of resurgence really changed things for this team. I think that first shot went down and that 3 didn't even move the net, and I think it probably did more for the rest of the team, honestly, than Solo Ball. I don't think confidence is really ever an issue for him when he's looking for his shot, but the thing that I liked aside from that is that he was constantly trying to get to the rim on top of looking for open threes. He only had 5 3-point attempts, which is probably the sweet spot for him at this point of the season, and same for Braylon Mullins. And like you said, Patrick, if they're going to go 40% from 3, whether that's 4 for 10 or even more than that, like UConn is not losing a lot of games the rest of this season. Like, it just opens up everything so much more when there's 2 legitimate shooters on either side that Reed can kick it out to, or the ball could be swung to, or running Mullins or ball off a billion different screens. So that's like kind of, you start to see the path, right? And I think that's kind of what Hurley has alluded to all season. There haven't been a lot of games this year where Mullins and Ball were firing on all cylinders, and that's for a lot of reasons. Ball was dinged up for a lot of the season. Mullins was hurt and missed some games. Ball didn't really shoot well this last month. So if they can both shoot it at a pretty efficient clip, UConn becomes really scary and looks like a team that kind of, what I talked about in the last pod, like outperforming their metrics. You can kind of pretty easily explain how they might be able to do that against a team like Duke. And I know we'll dive into the preview of the Blue Devils shortly, but the rebounding thing is not going away. And that's not a knock on UConn. I think they're a pretty decent rebounding team, but Michigan State is elite, and Duke is just as good, if not better. So it's going to come down to taking and making smart shots and trying to rebound and extend plays wherever possible. But they're going to have to be smart about the shots that they're taking, and I think that's why we saw, Mullins and Ball taking 10 3-point attempts instead of 15, because it's not that they're always bad shots, but they just have to be really open looks, because all of a sudden it's a long rebound and a fast break for Michigan State, now Duke. So that shot selection is going to be key for Sunday.
Couple other items I want to empty, excuse me, on from my notebook here. The bench had 17 points against UCLA, and they didn't really, score as much. I think it was only 3 or 6 points, 7 points, something like that. But the eye test of what everybody did. I mentioned Malachi. I mentioned all the bench, but I think that's like important, that like it doesn't have to be production if everybody is filling the role. It could be 7 points from Ryba, tomorrow. That is like, as long as the bench is kind of executing their roles that we all know of. Malachi being the change of pace, floor or table setter. Jalen Stewart, the big body that can guard multiple positions and hit a closeout three. Jaden Ross doing stuff, and Ryba kind of being that, the different look of Reed. That's all we need, that's all UConn needs if the rest of the starting five is playing the way they are. And it was so interesting to see kind of how they had Mullins in with those four for a little bit, then they swapped in Solo, then they swapped in Alex, and you can just kind of like, pull different levers based off of who was out there with that starting five, and it looked really, really good. I did not expect that kill shot to come with those guys on the floor. In fact, that was, they had their great start, and then they put all four in essentially for multiple minutes, and was worried a little bit, like, ooh, is this going to be how they quickly get back? And no, they extended it. And so a couple other things. It proved that, like, again, non-conference teams really, really struggle to guard off-ball action that UConn does, and we'll get into, like, the Duke stuff later. But that resulted in a huge regression to the mean for Michigan State. I think they were shooting above 40% from three heading into that game, and they couldn't do anything. The Reed versus Carson Cooper matchup, again, was how you can envision things going forward. Reed's never going to shut anybody down, but like, he clearly won that matchup, and he adjusted and stuck in there for a little bit. I have so many, that was, I think, one of the best Terrace Reed games I've seen, even though it didn't, obviously the stats were good, but it wasn't like, holy crap. But like, there's just a couple of things I want to highlight. Like, come out of the second half, Michigan State still got the momentum. They immediately give up the lead. They're down 2 or 4 or something like that. Alex had just rimmed out a 3, and then Braylon Mullins hits like a desperation 3 to go up, I think, 4, and then Terrace Reed comes down and picks Carson Cooper's pocket, goes coast to coast for the slam, and that was creating offense out of nowhere, which I think is such that's a premium for UConn right now. So much of their stuff is scripted, that to get those kind of baskets, and it was also like the second or third time he had followed up like a crappy play with like a positive one. And for a guy who thrives so much on momentum, it was really impressive. I mean, the first play of the game, he got his shit swatted by Cooper, and you're like, oh, okay, like, is he going to be, kind of a shell of himself now? And then he turns around and just put him in a blender the next time out. And some of that footwork stuff, and his foot speed on hedges. I mean, he had Fears Jr. just completely flummoxed. 5 of 15 from the field, 4 turnovers. It was what a combination that, Demery / Smith and then Reed on that high hedge. That is very, very, very good at like shutting off the point of attack, and bodes well for a Duke team, again, kind of teasing out the preview that like point guard is not their strength. So I've been very interested to see that. But then the last thing I'll say is that, like, yeah, while Michigan State like made it a track meet and kind of the game script had it as a track meet, they only had 5 fast break points. So like, they really, really made it, had to scout down and made sure they weren't, punished by Cohen Carr just doing absurd shit. I think it was only once or twice he had a highlight reel play. So like when you go down the leaderboard of like the scout essentially, and I think they said Kamani had that scout. I mean, they checked every box. And so on the quick turnaround, you have to be excited with how this team and how the program operates, that they're going to have everything dialed in. Obviously, execution, and you got to play the games and whatnot, but there's positive momentum to be built from the fact that like the last two games they have executed the game script perfectly. So there is sample size to say like, hey guys, we can do this here. Like this is how we do it, and we are talented enough to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll talk about it later, but I really think one of UConn's big advantages in this upcoming matchup is on the sidelines in coaching, right? That we believe UConn has a better crew over there heading into this matchup. And then, yeah, Terrace Reed, I mean, absolutely cooking at the beginning. Looked like he might have done a Furman-esque, if he really kept going. He kind of lost it for a stretch in the second half, early in the second half, but finished strong. And again, you cannot emphasize enough hitting free throws, going 4 for 4 in the final minute to make a 1-point lead, a 3-point lead, and a 2-point lead, a 4-point lead. Folks, what else can you ask for on this earth from a man who is also 6'10" and able to do steal and full court length, finishes and dunks, as well as being an elite rim protector? And then, like you also said, I mean, he was just showing off such an arsenal of moves down there in the post that I'm just excited to see where that goes. It's going to be a really interesting matchup in the low post going forward. Anything else before we go on to Duke? So let's talk about this matchup. The Duke Blue Devils beat St. John's and Rick Pitino, with little Rick Pitino in the stands watching, hoping to someday be in a major program or involved in an important basketball game of some kind on his own. So St. John's season ends in the Sweet 16. We love that for them, frankly. I know this is their first Sweet 16 since 1999. St. John's really happy to be there, and you have to be happy for them in that respect. Good, strong season for that burgeoning, interesting program that people sometimes talk about on Jimmy Fallon, even, which is great. Anyway,
You're a bad man, Aman. You're a bad man.
on to Duke, which I have to be honest, you just ambiently get so much information on Duke just by existing in the world that I don't really seek it out so much. But popped under the hood a little bit yesterday. I found out their record just yesterday. I was like, oh wow, 35-2. That's actually pretty sick. Good for you guys. Oh, I see why you got that 1 overall seed. You have elite shooting, perimeter defense, and rebounding. So that's pretty sick, and you have the potential number 1 overall pick. I don't follow NBA draft stuff. I don't really care, but that's my understanding. They love the draft at Duke. They love producing draft prospects. What they don't love doing as much is winning in the NCAA tournament. Still a very talented team in a tough matchup. Duke has not been at its best in the NCAA tournament. How are we thinking UConn stacks up, and what do you expect to be important on Sunday when that game tips off?
I know I was on this podcast less than 48 hours ago talking about how I would rather have a crack at St. John's and, play a team 4 times, all that stuff. But I do think it is way, way tougher for Duke to prepare for UConn than St. John's would have had they advanced. So I think just the intricacy of UConn's offense and how many people you have to keep track of at any given time, I think that's a huge advantage for UConn. That being said, Duke, relatively young team. I'm looking there towards the bottom in Division I experience, but the thing that sticks out for me is the length and the size that they have at every single position. They are massive. They move really well. They can get into the passing lanes. They're fast. They can get out on the break. The size has been the biggest thing when I've been watching them towards the end of the regular season in the NCAA tournament. They did not look impressive in the first round against Siena. You can say anything you want about that game. They did not look like the number 1 overall seed. They looked a little bit better against TCU. They were trailing in the second half of that game before they eventually pulled away. They won by 23. And St. John's, I think they just did enough to skate by. I think St. John's lost that game more than Duke won it, to be completely honest. And, we talked about this, but credit to St. John's for a hell of a season. I think that's their, national championship, making it to the second weekend. So tremendous achievement. And I don't want to talk about St. John's for too much, but I did see someone on Twitter say that they're going to be good for as long as Rick Pitino is there, which made me laugh out loud. So I just it gets me every time.
Could be any day now.
Right. It's like, yeah, so next year. But no, I mean, for everything that we talked about Michigan State from a rebounding perspective, Duke is just as good, right? They're 5th overall in offensive rebound percentage, and they limit offensive rebounds on the defensive end. They're top 10 in the country. So really good. They do a lot of their damage, inside the arc. Boozer in particular. They have Ngongba back now after missing some time due to injury. Like, they use their size to their advantage. I think it's a massive test for Terrace Reed. I still think it's something that UConn, I think this is a team that UConn can hang with. I don't know if UConn can win, but I certainly think that UConn has the edge in terms of offensive talent. In terms of their offensive intricacy, I think they're just a lot harder to prepare for than Duke. Duke does have a little bit more ISO ball than what we've seen from Michigan State. That does worry me in terms of is Solo Ball going to be able to guard his man for 25 minutes and be able to stop him from scoring or limit that? And what happens if Boozer or Ngongba gets Terrace Reed in trouble and Ryba has to come in? Because Ryba has played okay this tournament, but he has not looked like he has against elite bigs when it was just him earlier this season. So there are question marks. I think it's going to be an incredible game. There's a lot of blue blood discourse or whatever. We don't need to dive into that, but it is really cool to see two, we'll call them marquee programs, Duke and UConn, facing off for a shot at the Final Four. And it should be a really exciting matchup. I think Duke has won the last two that UConn and Duke have played, but those were both regular season matchups, and UConn has won the last two that were in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, the 1999 NCAA championship, which is 27 years to the day on Sunday, and of course that epic Final Four matchup in 2004 where Emeka Okafor put UConn on his back and led them to the national championship. So there is a lot of history there, despite them not playing that often. Hopefully, getting Hurley and Shire in the same regional, same room for an extended amount of time will lead to some non-conference matchups in future years, obviously at a neutral site or at Cameron Indoor. Not that Duke is going to travel, but it's exciting. It's all you can ask for. This is why you watch college basketball. UConn is trending in the right direction, playing some of their best basketball this season, going up against the top team in the country, the top overall seed, and they're going to give it their best shot and see if they're up to snuff.
I hope I don't get doomed for this reference, but there's the Friday Night Lights scene in the movie where Permian is playing I forget who but they're in the state championship and they're playing I don't know who, but there's a scene where the coach asks the player come out what's it like out there, and it's they're tall, they're fast, they're mean, they're big. It's yeah, you already said that. Anyway, it references the discrepancy there, and that's what I felt like watching the St. John's Duke game, because there were just 10 absurd athletes out on the court at all times. And if there's one thing that they had that both of those teams have over UConn, it's just the overall athleticism in size. Pair that with the ball movement oriented offense that John Shire's got them doing, and then the game breaker in Boozer. I mean, it's roster euphoria. You've got two great rim protectors in Malik Brown and in Ngongba. The switchy athletic guy in Dame Sarr, an absolute heat check guy in Isaiah Evans, a steady albeit hurt point guard in Caleb Foster, and then just kind of good role players in Kaden Boozer and Kamenia. But again, I hope that comparison doesn't come true, obviously, because the Friday Night Lights team lost. Running through some stuff that I saw that was interesting, like Boozer, go read an NBA draft scout on him. You'll get that. You'll get that better. But I did see he had, I think, 4 turnovers against St. John's, and so UConn doesn't force a ton, but something to monitor with him. Malik Brown is 6'9", so he will be giving up some size to Terrace Reed. Another thing to monitor. And Ngongba played 13 minutes against TCU and only 17 against St. John's, had 2 points, 3 rebounds. I can't imagine he's going to be feeling much better in a couple of days. There are some kind of cracks there that could be exposed. Isaiah Evans, I think, is the second biggest worry for me beyond Boozer. He torched St. John's for 25. He scores all 3 levels. He's talking shit in your face. Like he's the type of guy that you hate when you're watching. Dame Sarr reminds me a little bit of like Dylan Mitchell at St. John's, where he's just doing crazy, absurd athletic stuff. And Dylan Mitchell gave Braylon Mullins a hell of a time. So that's another worry of mine. But I really feel like beyond kind of like the center position being flawed / injured, UConn can really attack them at point guard. Caleb Foster wasn't like an amazing athlete anyway, like the only one that wasn't like in the 99th percentile, and he is playing on a surgically repaired foot that was that he hurt 20 days ago. That's absurd. And again, snaps to him for that, because that's crazy impressive. You do have to hand it to him there. But that's still something to attack and exploit. And with the way UConn has shut off the water of the Donovan Dents and the Jeremy Fears Juniors, Foster is taller and won't be, kind of like forced into the ISO stuff that those guys thrived at, but it is still something I think UConn can have an edge on. And then Caden Boozer, Cam's twin brother. Yeah, he's a good downhill attacking guy. He can make a couple of plays, but overall, compared to the rest of the roster, meh. It was a package deal there. I feel like if UConn can win the point guard and center battles there, you have to trust that there's enough shot making that they can hang with them, but I don't think it's impossible. There's I want to talk about the foul stuff, because that is something that is kind of the elephant in the room. You don't want to walk into a preview show and be like, well, if they don't foul. But there's a 68-24 free throw discrepancy so far Duke has had in the tournament, and Cam Boozer is just so good at hunting them. And he has almost kind of deprogrammed his game a little bit, and just to kind of all right, I'm going to take 3 dribbles, back you down, draw contact, get to the line. Then I hit a couple free throws, and then I'm in the rhythm of the game. Given UConn's propensity to foul, that scares the ever-living crap out of me. So, do we want to talk about the foul? How UConn can avoid that? Where's our head at from that standpoint?
My head is in a very concerned place when it relates to the fouls, because of what we know about the Duke whistle and, like you said, UConn's propensity to foul. I think it's almost like the Zach Edey thing. You just have to give them their free throws. You just have to take that and then find a different way, which obviously is tough given the team they've put together. But yeah, I don't know that you can game plan March 28th how to foul less against a team that also gets a favorable whistle. But the word on the street would be that this is going to need to be a Dan Hurley masterclass in working the refs, which I think could be very exciting to see. He might, get at them at the tunnel before the game, even, normally you just shake hands, you're really cordial, and he might have to, cold cock them a little bit, just to set the tone. So that's something to think about. It's going to be an elite Hurley working the refs moment. Other than that, I'm not sure what can be done or what they might even try schematically to avoid fouling. It's the ball going through their best player. Like you said, he's really good at that. It's just going to be Terrace Reed, Eric Reba. Be super careful. Eric absorb fouls so Terrace doesn't foul out again. That's the most I can come up with, and then the guards have to spread it out too among themselves because we need them all.
Yeah, I think it's something that is real, but also 100% unavoidable. Not even because of like the Duke whistle or whatever. It's just the way that UConn operates. They are not a team that is trying to get to the free throw line a whole lot. So Duke is like that disparity is going to happen. Like it happened in the Michigan State game. It is going to happen on Sunday night. So that part is unavoidable. I think if you're Hurley, you do need to just lobby and just make sure that that whistle is being administered both ways. I think, James Breeding officiated the game on Friday. He probably is not going to do the game on Sunday. There's beef with Hurley and Breeding. I don't know how real or fake that is, but I think there's some bad blood there. I think the biggest thing is like trying to just make sure that Hurley is working those refs in a way that is reasonable and no room for error with a technical foul or anything like that. Like I think UConn will need to play pretty perfect basketball to beat Duke, and anything like a technical to throw off the momentum, change the margins, something like that could really, really be devastating. So I think everyone is aware of it. I think the refs are aware of it, and I think that means Hurley has to be on his best behavior. Not that he has been bad really this season, but just like it's so obvious that I think you have to just kind of roll with it, like you said, Aman, and just advocate where you can. And, UConn is not going to take 35 free throws tomorrow night. Like, there's just no scenario where that happens, but all you can ask for is that the fouls get called when they need to be called, and that it's relatively fair both ways.
And I do think there's a world where there is a huge discrepancy and UConn still wins the game. It's not like, if Cam Boozer shoots 10 free throws, you throw up your hands like, well, it's over. Or if Terrace Reed is in foul trouble in the first half. Like, this team has shown the ability to kind of like, they could shoot their way back into anything. So even if they're down 10 or 12 points and they're facing foul trouble, like, they could make a run. And I know that's a little bit of copium given the task at hand, but we have the sample size. And also, first, a couple other things I want to double click on. Madigan, you referred to the off-ball movement stuff. Everyone's asking, who's going to guard Cam Boozer? How does UConn, guard these guys, blah, blah, blah. They got to guard UConn, too. And I know Duke switches everything, but they're not necessarily top-locking, I believe. So there will be some mismatches there. Cam Boozer is either going to have to chase Alex through Terrace Reed and Eric Ryba in solo ball screens, or they're switching, and then Alex can find himself on somebody that he can take advantage of and get those open looks and knock them down. It is a lot to go through that movement for 40 minutes. Izzo remarked after the game how they were exhausted. Granted, that was the 19-point comeback, but Duke better be ready for that, because that's something I can really see, them having problems with, which leads to the other point of you are 100% right, Madigan. St. John's lost that game, and they lost it for the reasons we talked about. But another one that we haven't was they were completely bamboozled by that. Was it the 1-2-2 zone, 1-3-1 zone? And they also didn't have the personnel for that. You got to think that Luke Murray is scouting up ways to get open looks. There's probably going to be, I'd say, maybe 5 to 10 minutes of that zone that Shire is going to throw in there, and they have to be ready for that. Because I can see the off-ball movement really exposing them and then going to that as a counterpunch. So you have to have the counterpunches to the counterpunches ready. Beyond the X's and O's, I love this game just as a spectator, because I think UConn can thrive as the underdog. They're a 5.5 Duke is a 5.5 favorite, number one overall seed. Cam Boozer, all these lottery picks. The pressure is off. And compare that to the game that's tipping off in literally 4 minutes with Illinois playing like their fiercest rival, or one of their fiercest rivals in Iowa, an 8 seed or a 9 seed, I can't remember. And the expectation that, like, okay, we have to win this game to get to the Final Four. Not saying that's like I would rather be playing Duke. I would much rather be playing Iowa. But Illinois fans have to be so tight right now. And I'm sure the team is tight. UConn, on the other hand, they can play with some brashness, some swagger, knowing that, like, two things can be true at the same time. Like, you are talented enough to hang with this team, and you also are being overlooked by everybody. That's like the perfect sweet spot for an upset. And again, as we mentioned, like, Duke can bleed. Jerry McNamara made them bleed. Like St. John's had them on the ropes. Like, they have been playing with fire, and I think UConn has, at least for the tournament, really resolved their inconsistency issues. Game to game, like within the game flow, yeah, they don't look perfect, but that's we talked about. That's kind of the product of how they play. But that has me feeling just like very light and carefree and nervous about it. I'm not sure how you guys feel overall.
I mean, I personally am nervous, but thankfully I'm not playing in the game. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if you're a player on the team, I think that 100% is the case. You have nothing to lose here. No one's saying you got to win this game by 12 for the Ken Palm spread. None of that is part of your conversation, and it's kind of dangerous to think about what a UConn team with nothing to lose might do, because they're not really in that situation. They play really, really hard in the non-conference because they need those wins, and then they do have to win every Big East game with a ton of pressure and a ton of mauling and familiarity and all of that stuff. And then it's Duke. It's the evil empire. What a moment to have in this regional final matchup. I used to say this all the time back, many, many years ago, but the world needs reminding that there would be 2 more Duke championships and 2 more Kentucky championships without UConn's first 4 championships. And so that's service, exactly, that UConn has done for the nation, and I think they're capable of doing it again. Absolutely. Again, I don't think it needs to warrant that much conversation. The thing about the matchup, it's 2 teams having a great year. I do want to throw one other note out for you guys. Duke's Isaiah Evans said, "I don't think we have any extra buzz when we think about UConn." Now, I might say that too if I knew my school had lost twice to UConn in the NCAA tournament in very big, high-profile games and matchups. Dan Hurley spoke in great detail about where he was in every Duke UConn game in the NCAA tournament from the past. But yeah, where do you guys think the players' heads are at, just in terms of this idea that Duke's kind of going, all right, we don't feel anything extra. The UConn players are giving it the proper kind of lip service. They're not going crazy, but they're saying, look, this is a part of history. This is an exciting matchup. It's exactly what you want, right? They're saying the right things. Duke, a little dismissive. So something to chew on there, I think.
I think UConn's overall reaction comes back to Dan Hurley being a real student of the game and someone that's been kind of enmeshed in college basketball culture for decades now. And, his brother, one of the greatest college basketball players of all time, a Duke legend, during their absolute heyday. And I think it's fair to have some of that nostalgia, and also the fact that Duke was at one point the premier program in all of college basketball. I think it's worth Hurley respecting that and passing that respect on to his players. But I see Isaiah Evans' side too. This is 2 programs that have not played a lot. Like I said, they played last in 2014. I think there's constant hankering from fans for these teams to face off in the non-con, and it just has not gotten done. And, if they're not playing, you don't see that on TV. Like, yes, UConn won championships pretty recently. Duke has too, but if you don't see them playing against one another, it's hard to get like super excited. I could see how they feel like it just feels like another big NCAA tournament game. Whereas for fans who've been around and followed these teams and programs for decades, you can see like it feels like a really big deal that these two programs are coming together for a Final Four spot on the line, and why it definitely has more juice than an Illinois Iowa game or whatever those other matchups are. Like it's just frankly a bigger deal. Like there's just more national championships between the two. There's just more at stake, and you throw in what's happened to Duke and UConn in the NCAA tournament with 1999, 2004, and everything else before that. It is a high stakes game. It means a lot, and I think it's cool to see Hurley giving it the respect it deserves. And I'm sure Shire feels, similarly too. I don't know what he said on it, but I could totally see the players being like, yeah, whatever. It's just another big game. And Duke especially plays in a lot of big games every year. So it's not really any different. So I kind of see both sides.
Yeah, no hate on Isaiah Evans for making that comment. If you do want me to be a generational hater, I will hate on John Shire for essentially not respecting the game enough to tell his team, it's like, hey man, look at what UConn has done, look at the history here. Again, Madigan, you nailed it. Hurley is a student of the game, an absolute sicko. And he is telling all of this, his team, all of the Duke lore, all of the Duke UConn lore. And it's probably reflective in the press conferences and how the players have talked about it. So to translate, Isaiah Evans, I don't blame you for you were not alive for 1999. I think you were 1 years old for 2004. But I'm very curious to see Shire not kind of talk that up and be I'm pretty sure he was no, he wasn't around for that. Yeah, man, come on. Are we not gonna give UConn their flowers there a little bit? Not just completely glaze them, but just recognize the lore behind it. So I'm gonna choose to be a little miffed by the top down leadership there. It just shows you the kind of men they are over there. They're not great men.
Yeah, it's a fair point. You can't blame a guy for just having bad teachers, right? Which is
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, perfect. But I think another thing that while I'm on my generational hater mode here, we got to take some victory laps on the haters and losers here. Of which there were many. How do we even broach this subject about UConn is in the Elite Eight for the third time in 4 years? Their one NCAA tournament loss was to the eventual national champion, and yet if you went game to game on the interwebs, this team is awful, soft. Alex Karaban is washed up and should be working at Intuit. I don't know. I think this is our chance to be vindictive here and say that they're the touch grass protocol, the panic button stuff, all of our bits and gags are leading to this moment here. So would anyone want to kick it off here and address the room?
I can start. Yeah, I think the touch grass protocol, like we discussed, was up in the air in the UCLA game, right? We were saying, look, if UConn loses that game, especially UCLA not having its best player, it's the second round, it's just Mick Cronin, that would be a tough moment for us on the touch grass protocol, because we're saying this team is solid. They still have every hope for March that you want, and you don't need to be so dramatic, basically was kind of the underlying discussion of the touch grass protocol. I think when it comes to the detractors and the haters, of which there are many, they fall into a few different buckets, right? So there's Big East fan base haters, or which not too different from kind of a national hater, like a like a Duke person who's just like, oh, you're weak, or let's say a Michigan State person who's like, oh, you're weak, you play in the weak Big East, I don't even respect your record, that kind of thing, into someone at, say, Providence, who it's their Super Bowl to play a close game against UConn, right? So it's kind of like that, where the line of embarrassment for a UConn fan in these Providence games or in these Butler games is like, we don't even want to be close in these scenarios. And that gives them a little bit of ammo, right? Because they go crazy. Xavier hits a three to get within 7 against UConn, and they're going crazy in the Cintas Center. We don't have that, right? So it's a little bit, that's one crew of haters. And then there's within the fan base, of course. Within the fan base, as we've discussed, there are some people who expect perfection, I think. There are some people who maybe just want to be mad online. There are some people who think, unless your metrics are perfect, you are not going to be excellent or have an amazing season, even if we're hyper-analyzing things in December or January. And so those are the people we need to kind of address. That's like my, I think of the universe, if I could set the stage for it like that. And then I think we could just bat down some of those really persistent takes across the season, some of the people who were given up on, some of the players who were really besmirched, and some of the real, persistent takes that we think need to go away, or where if you have this on your track record, you got to put your hand up. Or maybe even, if you have a few of these transgressions, hand in your badge. Take a break from commentary for a little bit. So that's my, initial run of thinking. I'd love to hear some of your guys' favorite bad takes you heard across, the run of UConn/Hurley detractors.
There's a lot. I think I don't need to dive into all of them, I don't think, but the stuff about Caravan, the stuff about Solo Ball, there's some Malachi Smith slander in the middle of the year that I thought was a little ridiculous, but I think it just comes back to, without getting too much on my high horse here, like a societal thing, like seeing the big picture. It's not just, there's some honor and some fun in living and dying with every possession, but at the same time, the long game is what matters. And I think most fans that really enjoy UConn basketball agree that, Dan Hurley is good at his job at preparing this team to compete for national championships. And I think people get lost in the sauce a little bit with, 4-minute stretches in January or December or whatever, when you have to kind of take a step back and look at the big picture and realize that, there are going to be bumps in the road. It is not going to be 2024 every year where, UConn is just rolling by teams for 4 months on the way to a national championship. And I think it becomes more evident than ever in March. It was very fair to think that if UConn did not get by UCLA, this could have been a failed season. But UConn and Dan Hurley put together the work and the game plan to do what was necessary to advance, and now they have a shot at making their 8th Final Four and a real shot at their 7th national championship. So the biggest thing for me is just, touching grass, taking that step back, seeing the big picture. And it's totally fair to, get upset and get frustrated when things aren't working how they should be, but there's a bigger piece to all of this, and I think this coaching staff has just earned the benefit of the doubt when things get a little rough, that they're going to figure it out this time of year, and it looks like they've done that again.
Yeah, I mean, the bookmark feature is amazing, by the way. I would love to call out people personally, but that's not what we do here at the Fast Break Pod. No, we're better than that. We're great men. But I will read just snippets of things I've seen, just to kind of give you this sense of the vitriol out there. Major fraud alert. They're getting worse. First weekend upset written all over it. Tasty. Let's see. Effing pathetic. Dog walked. Ashamed of themselves. Nice. Mediocre. slow, soft, not particularly athletic, weak. Round of 32 loss. Book it. And that's just a sliver of stuff. And it just blows my mind that like you don't have to say those things. You don't have to. That's not your job. Like you're not so like these are 19, 20, 21 year old kids you are melting down over. Sure, like when the team doesn't play well, that stinks. And sometimes when the effort's not great, darn, that's it. I'm sorry. Like you have a like a mental illness. I think if you have to then take that to social media, where these players see it, like everybody is online. And where these players see it, and then it just gets all this attention. And it's I think it's if you want to talk about pathetic, that's what it is. And I'm sorry, like we can't beat around the bush and be like, oh, that's not very good. No, it's like loser behavior. And honestly, for a program that, like you said, I mean, I totally that was such a great take, Aman, that like we have prevented 2 UK and 2 Duke titles in the world. I mean, give us the FIFA Presidential Medal of Freedom at this point. To be that such to be a fan of a program of such contributions to society to then be miserable, it just I don't understand it. Like, and again, maybe we're naive, and maybe that's it. Like maybe we're just like kind of head in the clouds, not realizing that there are a lot of bad actors out there. I guess that's all I got. Like maybe we need to be a little bit better and just recognize that like for as great as things are right now, there's always going to be a little bit of rot.
That's a really mature way to look at it, Patrick, especially after we've spent all season kind of really getting worked up about online commentators. But yes, it's good to have the perspective that, the people being the loudest online are not always representative of a large group. And for every person who's going, isn't it insane that this thing happened? There's like 60% of people going about their day pretty happy about it all. But amazing stuff there, Patrick, with the receipts. Yeah, I mean, I think, like whenever someone purports to know what's going on in a player's head, like that's a good sign. You can kind of like ignore them. To just be like, oh, they don't care. He's lost a step. He's forgotten how to play basketball. All of that stuff. That's crazy. I think we gotta, once and for all, just because it's out there, you still see the tweet, of the like 5-year-old holding a clipboard, and they go Dan Hurley without Donovan Clingan. I mean, it's an awful take on its premise. But even 2 years ago, or even whenever you want to, try and at its worst, throw that out there. But to bring this team to the Elite Eight, to have restored the roster the way you have, to have the guys who you believed in develop in the way that they have, it's a really tremendous roster building job. I say it all the time. The whole college sports world and how you do roster construction is evolving like quicksand. And they've gone ahead and won made it to 3 Elite Eights in 4 years. That's insane. That's an insane run. It's almost as impressive as winning back-to-back championships to be in 3 Elite Eights. And this team was a different group, right? They did it with a different crew of people. It has been a much different journey than any of than those championship seasons, but it's been a really big success. And then I will just end with this. If they beat Duke here, look, back to the kind of overall thing, UConn is 6-5 on them in national championships, just as a note, right? A thing that should have come up a lot more rather than just saying blue blood to the people who were hammering questions and interviews today at the arena. But if UConn beats Duke, which they have a chance to do, it'll be a really big deal. Again, it will be it'll almost, you could say, be like UConn as a program grabbing the torch from Duke and saying, we are the captains of college basketball now. And that would be sick. That would be really cool and good, in my opinion. So that is where I'm landing with all of that. what more could you ask? It's been an incredible season. It's leading up to this amazing matchup. If they lose, so be it. It's been a tremendous run, but it very much has a chance to continue and stay alive. And those guys are doing it. They're making it happen.
Also, just like again, perspective, the whole country has now pivoted to like UConn side. Like the world is watching and the world is rooting for UConn. Like think of how like Furman, like the Furman fans, all the neutrals there were rooting against UConn. That's fine. That's normal. Now that has completely pivoted. You got all the neutrals, all the casuals want to see Duke go down. Like does it get any better than that to know that like you are talented enough to do it and then you have everybody pulling for you?
Yeah, and look, Pat McAfee didn't know that we didn't beat the Ken Palm spread against Butler in January, right? So we're talking about the biggest names in sports, talking about UConn. He had Hurley on earlier this week. Hurley gave some really good answers. The national media is what I'm saying, which is represented most by Pat McAfee and his id. The national media just kind of checks in on UConn in March anyway. And so from their perspective, UConn's just a really good team. They don't really have some of the the insecurities that someone who has watched UConn all season might have. And so they're just like, oh, of course UConn can do this thing. What are you talking about? So it's a good vibe situation. Duke will obviously have a lot of support in Washington D.C. They love it there. There's lots of Dukies in and around the DMV. It's really one of the toughest things about living there, having spent a lot of time in the area. UConn should have good fan support as well. Ticket prices remain really, really challenging, but if you do make it, there's a UConn alumni pregame event, which typically is pretty fun, and the game will tip off at 5:05 p.m., which is an absolute thrill. I'm getting old. These 2 a.m. leaving after a game times are really hurting my body clock and schedule. So, I'm just gaining a lot of appreciation for the players and, baseball beat writers or something like that, I guess.
Thank your local journalist.
Yeah.
So thank you for your service, Aman.
That's right. Thank you. You're welcome. Everyone's got to do their part for the Big J community, and that is going to do it for us here on this episode of The Fast Break. Thank you all for listening or watching.